Barb, welcome to the show.
Hello, great to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you today. So I'd like to start the show off, Barb, with a quick introduction of yourself and your company, Sapia.ai.
Yeah, so look, I'm Barb, founder and CEO. I've been doing this since 2018. I had about four jobs, four careers before I came to this, so I'm probably quite an unusual founder of an AI company. I'm neither a data scientist, engineer, and I'm much older than your usual founder. But I think with that, I bring wisdom and a deep understanding of the market and the problem we're trying to solve. So, and I have three kids, which are also very much shaped me in my leadership.
Awesome. And Sapia, what's the current state of the company with any metrics that you can share?
Yeah, so look, we took 2 years to get to product market fit, which happened during COVID, and we were pretty much, um, you know, going on the smell of an oily rag. And then I did a Series A where Macquarie Bank, who's a phenomenal investment bank that's pretty universally known, but particularly in Australia, the venture capital arm backed us, and they don't do many investments, so that felt like a real privilege. And W23, which is the investment arm of Woolworths, our largest customer, also invested in us off the back of seeing the impact of the technology in their organization. They're the largest private employer in the country. So that has really helped us accelerate growth. And I'm in the UK now. This is really our big growth market. I can talk a little bit about the difference between selling into the UK and Europe versus the US, but we're seeing really tremendous success here. So excited to be growing the business in another market.
Awesome. And let's dive into what exactly does Sapia do?
Yeah, so that is a really good question. Because you know what, the reality of technology like ours, we've always been innovation led. When people say you product led or you sales led, we're really innovation led. I came from the space of HR and being a CHRO, and all I wanted to do was change the way hiring worked. And I conceptualized it not with any reference to technology. AI didn't even enter my vocabulary. I didn't even know what it was. And so I think I had a very clear vision about how do you create an experience of hiring which works for everyone, which is human, and really, help move the world through hiring, create opportunity, democratize opportunity, make it more efficient. And that's really the journey that we've been on. So what we have built is a unique IP that is fueled by a data set. So that's really our moat, 2 billion words. So it's captured from people doing structured interviews around the world. Now we're at 6 million interviews, 47 countries, and we've used that data to really build a product, to create our own algorithms, to leverage inventions like BERT to create Interview BERT. And we're really an innovation machine. And so where we're going is less driven by what's actually going on out there. It's much more driven by how quickly we can leverage our own IP and the inventions of the universe, like Claude, which we've just recently integrated into our product, to change the way people think about talent. So, there are so many things that we've built that the market is not quite ready for. That's the biggest challenge is our, the chasm, and it's a chasm between innovation and enterprise readiness, willingness to adopt, because we're an enterprise-based solution, is really enormous. So, that's one of the biggest challenges is that the market, you have to kind of go at the pace of the market or do your best to try and move them to go faster.
Well, that's fun. And I know you guys have been big on educating the market and providing them with what AI can do in hiring. I'd love to really understand, Barb. For example, like a company that's working with Sapia, what kind of roles are they hiring for, and how exactly would they use one of your products in their organization?
Mm. So traditionally, we've been focused on volume hiring. So imagine you're a really large business and you're getting a crazy volume of applicants to hire.
Mhm.
And actually, the quality of hire really matters because you don't want to be hiring the same role 10 times over. And how do you do that? Well, you're not going to do it through reading a resume. And for starters, resumes don't tell you very much these days, particularly given fake resumes. And you also recognize that your candidates are your customers. So you really want to create an experience for the disappointed, not just for those that are hired. And you're an enormous retailer. Like if you think some of our clients, Kmart, Target, Starbucks, Joe and the Juice, you need to have a team that is representative of the diversity of the community you serve, right? So you're trying to solve for all three things. And that's what we really do. So we bring in a technology that gives everyone an interview right at the top of the funnel as soon as you go into the ATS. Everyone gets personalized feedback and coaching, which they freaking love because most people are ghosted. What we're then doing is scoring people, and you have a choice of what you do next. You might automate through to a video, which is non AI. You might go straight to automate to interview scheduling, but effectively we're delivering the apply to decide journey in like an hour, and you can hire in an hour, and there's no need for people to be touching that process. So for a business like Woolworths that gets 1 million applications a year and they're hiring 50,000, they're hiring in 2 days. And it's a fully asynchronous automated process. There's actually no one meeting to do an interview. We've just expanded our capability into hiring for any role, any language, where you're able to take a job description and convert that into a structured interview, design a chat interview. It takes about 2 minutes. So imagine you're hiring for your team. You don't want to go through 10 resumes. Like, your time is so precious. And their greatest invisible cost in the world is all those time that people do interviews. So we try and avoid you doing too many interviews. We try and give you better intelligence. We try and make you smarter. And we're doing that now across really hiring for any role. So we're very much going after tech companies, I will say, as our secondary vertical.
So there's tech companies, and I want to understand. You mentioned companies like Starbucks, retail companies. So would this be, because what I'm thinking of is I remember the days when I was applying for jobs at a local grocery store, and I would get my resume. We go and print out maybe 20 resumes, and we go to the stores and try to find the manager and hand them a
Mm,
resume.
mm.
So are the jobs like those kinds of jobs in retail stores as well, in addition to tech markets? I just really want to understand what
Yeah,
jobs.
that's been our core. That's been our core product market fit, and what we've built our product around is volume hiring for
Okay.
low skilled, semi-skilled roles. So think, Qantas as a client. Think of all the roles above the wing where they use us. Think of contact centers, BPOs, food and beverage, hospitality, retail operations, from store contact centers to DCs and warehouses. All of those roles, you're getting a lot of applications, and no one's time is served by reading a resume, a CV.
Hmm.
And CVs need to die. They need to die pretty fast, particularly given the ease with which you can create a CV to apply for any job, that isn't authentic. So that's one of the biggest challenges we're hearing from heads of talent is, I don't have a CV that I can trust anymore. So how am I going to figure out who to interview, right? And Sapia takes care of that and more.
It's very interesting. And I love one thing that you said as well, where you provide the candidates with feedback on things that they can improve. So it's also looking to improve obviously the enterprise experience in hiring, but as well for the people on the grounds looking for jobs, you guys provide them with tools that they can use to go and find a job and learn from applying and going through your interview process.
Yeah, the idea is that you've invested this time, right? You've made the effort to reflect on who you are and share your story of who you are in 5 questions, only 5 questions. And they're really normal questions. It's not like a weird and wonderful game that you're engaging with, or a video where people hate video at the top of the funnel. And so why not give you something back? And so everyone gets coaching. And we actually productize that data set into a conversational coaching bot. My vision a couple of years ago was that everyone in the world had their own career coach in their back pocket. The challenge is no one wanted to pay for it then, and particularly organizations aren't there to serve candidates. So how do you monetize that? Where we're now selling that in to organizations who are our clients, we're starting with our clients, is mobility. So you're an employee of a company, and you want to go somewhere else, but you really don't know yourself and you don't know your skills. What we've seen from people giving feedback about the coaching is very many people don't know their skills and they don't know how to articulate their skills. So if you want to encourage mobility, you need to first give people the opportunity to learn about themselves, and then you can steer them to the open roles. So that's a secondary byproduct, if you like, of our IP that we've also been testing in market with customers.
I love that because yeah, a lot of times I know, for example, my sisters would ask me, "What's some resume advice?" And then we'd have to go through kind of like ask her some questions, figure out the right way to write it, put that on her
Yeah,
resume, etc. So I love that you guys are helping people do that as well and building it in
yeah.
to your workflow.
Well, I mean, applying for a job is as important to me as it is to you as the hiring manager, right? And I think we just forget that it's a big decision, who you go and work for, and it's a risk for the individual as well. And so we've tried to build the whole experience around agency. How do we give people agency? How do we give candidates agency, recruiters, hiring managers, so that everyone can make the right decision? It's got to be a more symmetrical process, not just a one-sided, company has all the power process.
Awesome. And it's a fundamental shift in how people are hiring. A lot of things you just told me are when I go back 10 years ago when I was applying for my first jobs.
Mm. Mm.
This is a completely different way of going about that process. So, what kind of objections have you heard and what kind of feedback have you gotten
Mm.
when you're bringing this new technology? I mean, AI is
Mm.
bigger now than it ever was, and it's only going to continue
Mm.
to grow. But I imagine
Mm.
that these large enterprises, they still are
Mm.
unsure how to work with this new technology. So, how do you go about managing those conversations and educating people on the power of your product?
Yeah, yeah. So look, early on, we decided that in order to build trust in our science, because this is science, we had to do a bunch of things. And there was an immediate payback, but that investment has really started to pay back now when the world is really genuinely ready for AI. We basically gave away our IP in many ways. All of our science was written up, published, peer reviewed. We shared it. We wanted to be transparent about what is this thing that sits under the hood here? How does it work? We invested in R&D and in ways that a startup wouldn't. Like what startup has an R&D team, right? Like it doesn't happen. So we made some really big in principle decisions about the data we'd capture and the data we wouldn't. We were obsessed around only using first party data and not having any third party data like resume data, Twitter data, to really build trust in the technology. Because I think trust comes from transparency, and it also comes from um, using data that people give to you in a consensual way, right? So the idea of seeing what your background looks like and the facial movements and reading that, I find really obnoxious as a former HR person. That's not going to imbue trust between you and me as your hiring manager, as your employer. And so we want to make it clear to the candidate that the only data we're using is the data that you give us, and you're giving us, it's your responses. So decisions like that were really important, and that's helped to serve and build our brand around ethical AI. But fundamentally, apart from ICP, you need to think about persona. This is smart technology and you need smart people to buy it. And so we qualify out quite quickly. And if we don't think you have the maturity or there isn't a leader on the other side who's got the conviction and the credibility to lead this change because it's a transformation, we'll just opt out. So if you look at our clients, they're very sophisticated, smart businesses who have sponsors in them that are people who want to drive change. If you've been in the same role for 10 years and nothing's changed, we're not a fit for you. And I'll often say to people, if all you want is a faster status quo, you're just trying to automate what you're doing now, here's 3 companies you can go to that can help you with that. That's not us. And so we are selective because we know that the journey for impact requires leadership, requires change. Winning hearts and minds is always the hardest thing of introducing anything like this. And you're disrupting a lot of very strongly held assumptions, like people shouldn't be given feedback. I remember in the early days, I spoke to someone from AWS and they say they deliberately keep people in the dark from a risk perspective. And so, they're not a fit for us. So you have to find the persona fit from a buyer perspective, which is really a human.
Yeah.
And there always is one, even in a big enterprise. And then you're obviously also evaluating for the ICP fit. But the biggest challenge is the chasm, as I said, between innovation and enterprise willingness is really large. And so from our perspective, targeting companies with big, big, big problems and a lot of pain, if a client says or a prospect says, we've got a 28 million pound turnover problem, we love that, right? That's exactly why we exist, because a big impact from Sapia is reducing turnover. That means someone in the business really cares about this. It's not just someone in HR who's getting excited about some sexy AI tool. So we know what drives, a business case, and we invest a lot of time in qualifying both persona, ICP, and business case upfront.
Have you found that certain industries have been more open to adopting this sort of AI technology, or do you really focus on a specific person within an organization who's forward thinking?
It's both. You need the intersection of both. I'll give you an example. I was on a call with a really well-known tech company based out of the US, like famous for we're amazing, great culture, come and work with us. And they had like a ridiculous process of 18 steps and 60 days and all of this. And they wanted to just get a solution to solve for this little tiny thing right at the beginning. And I went back to them and said, we don't do that, but we can do all of this for you if you're open to transformation. And they said, no, we just want to do this. And so to me, that's doesn't make sense, even though I'd love them to be on our, client register. If they're not ready to reimagine, then we're not for them. So, yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It is interesting diving in there because, too, especially with tech companies, I can understand as well. They might have their own idea of how they want to go through things and
Mm,
just
mm,
want to go ahead with that. I want to take
mm,
a step back, Barb, to something that you previously mentioned on ethical
mm,
AI. So I know in the Sapia platform, you're giving feedback to people, and
mm,
obviously there's a whole lot of hands off that's happening that
mm,
was once traditionally very human to human. Now we're able to replace that with technology, which is
mm,
fantastic. But then there's a certain level of it that's out of the
mm,
control of
mm,
people. And they might wonder, I imagine, what the feedback
mm.
will be to a candidate who's applying for a position at my company. Because maybe they tie that feedback to my company, correct? So my question is,
Yeah, the feedback's not directional about the role. It's not saying, "Hey, Marcus, you're frigging awesome," right? Like we're putting you forward, you're a perfect fit. What it's saying is learning is growth. We learned some things about you around your personality, and we want to share them with you and give you a few tips to help you understand yourself and build your career and your self-awareness. So there's no connection between the feedback and the role, right? It's really just about learning for the sake of learning and acknowledging you as someone who applied for the job.
mhm. And is that something that's clearly communicated, I guess, to people who are going through the process so that they know what to
Yeah,
expect there?
yeah. And like 99% of people love it. I can't begin to tell you the mythology around people don't want AI. Like you mentioned before about you're losing the human touch. Well, no one is having the human touch, right? In a positive way. There's a few lucky people who either have the right CV because they went to AWS, worked at AWS, or they went to whatever school they went to. And they're the ones that manage to get a conversation with someone. But 99% of people don't ever get that far. And, there's a lot of inequity in hiring. And when you think about LinkedIn just released a report around, the skills of the future. I mean, we're more focused on competencies because we think competencies are enduring, skills are very ephemeral. But at the end of the day, what they identify was communication skills as the number one requirement that gets you a job. But then all of those so-called soft skills or power skills, your self-awareness, your maturity, your curiosity, your ability to see around corners, to inspire others to go with you. Like for a startup, like that's what matters. I didn't have any data science skills. I'm just this kind of crazy woman with a mission, right? Who's relentless, right? Relentless. And you're not going to see that in a CV. Like I'm in sales. I don't have any sales on my CV. No one would give me a job in sales, but I must be pretty damn good at it, right? Because I've sold to VCs, I've sold to people from a talent perspective, and then obviously from a business. And so we are so limited by our own biases and what we've seen before. Mirror hiring, mirror investing is a real thing. And so what if you could just
Mhm.
blindly, like love is blind, right? Like the
Uh-huh.
same thing. Why do I need to see you to hire you? What I need to know is who you are, right? Are you the person that's going to frigging, knock on doors and door-to-door combat and sales and, and be, never give up, right? If you're hiring someone for sales, that's what matters, not whether you've been a salesperson before. So, I think you miss out on talent when you rely on the human to make those screening decisions.
100%. Yeah, especially with the kind of volume that happens nowadays. It's,
Mm,
as you
mm.
mentioned, impossible for somebody to go through and just dedicate that amount of time to talking to somebody and actually picking up on those personality traits that you can't get through, yeah, a resume.
Yeah, I mean, humans don't scale, and now I still think the human needs to be involved, but where I think it matters is do it where you know that you want to hire this person. That's where you shower them with love. So
Yeah.
when you get to the final stage and you've made 3 offers, you want to have a 100% win rate. You lose someone there, you've wasted a lot of time, right? Or a 100% cross offer win rate. That's where the human love should go. And then also from a recruiter perspective is to spend time with you as a hiring manager and understand what are you really looking for here? Because hiring managers don't have time and they often don't really think deeply about what's going to drive success. I've made hiring mistakes. I'm sure you've made hiring mistakes. How do we learn from those? And not just put the same resume out, the same job description out and keep going through the same process. And that's where the human intelligence and thought partnering and business partnering really needs to happen way more than what it is now. So that's where I think recruiters, should be reimagining their role.
Mhm. I want to dive into an enterprise client using Sapia. When they are describing the kind of person they're looking for in the role, how do they determine what sort of qualities that they're looking for and be able to put that into the platform? So when the screening
Mm,
process is happening, the
mm,
correct person arrives at their
mm,
plate after the
mm.
screening.
Yeah, yeah. So we use what's called rule-based models rather than classical machine learning models because you can explain them and the human in the loop, the customer signs off on them. So those rules are set by the customer. The way we used to do it was really through a collaboration with the stakeholders. What do you think the best person looks like in this role? What's an ideal juicer? And sometimes we would do that in a crowdsourcing way, inviting lots of store managers to share that and then convert that into a data profile. The way we do it now is we use the job description as the source of truth, and that is converted through to a set of skills. And that's how we determine it. But there's still rules that the customer is saying, yes, 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 these are the competencies and the weightings that I'm looking for. So they own that. But what is beautiful about AI is that you get to actually validate that. So when you start to see people being hired, you can see whether or not they're hiring against that profile. But more importantly, when you see people leave or stay, you can check that the right profile is actually performing in the role. And in high volume, the best measure of performance is tenure. And many of our customers suffer from high turnover, particularly in the first 90 days. So you're able to look at you thought it was this based on the job description, you're hiring this, but actually it turns out it's this profile. And then we retrain the models. And so that ability to improve the recommendation of your algorithms and to become like an Amazon or a Netflix, much more accurate with data, is where the power comes in, particularly for really large businesses who are seeing a lot of throughput. You can get to, high accuracy within a few months of using a tool like Sapia. And that's where we're a true machine learning system. We're not a psychometric assessment that is fixed and doesn't really learn, and we're learning from data that's non-human data. And that's really important. We wouldn't rely on your assessment of someone to decide whether to adjust the model, for instance, because
Uh,
you're biased.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love hearing that with AI companies is that it starts this snowball effect where you
Mm.
get it going and then you get more data and you get better and better and better and it can just continue to refine that process over time.
Yeah.
So Barb, when you're working with a lot of our enterprise clients, obviously
Mm.
those sales cycles can be very long and there's a big adoption process here. I'd love to know how, from a business perspective, you guys are able to navigate enterprise
Mm.
deals, which perhaps have long sales cycles.
Mm.
And then when it comes to things such as understanding how much revenue is going to come in, but the sales
Mm.
cycles are super long.
Mm.
And that could be a challenge, obviously, with
Mm.
projections, et cetera. So I'd love to hear
Yeah.
how you navigate that and what your approach is to that,
Yeah.
to working
To
with
that, I mean,
enterprise.
forecasting is really hard when you're in such a lumpy business. We can have seven-figure clients, six-figure clients, and if a deal falls over, it really is affecting. So it's hard. So the first thing, as I mentioned, is you've got to qualify ruthlessly, right? So that you don't waste your time. I'd rather lose fast, get out fast, than waste our time. So for the salespeople, I really want to make sure that their conversion rates are high once we get past that, very, very sort of rigorous qualifying process. So the biggest tax, the product can actually be stood up tomorrow. We're in many integrations, SuccessFactors, Workday, Smart Recruiters. So you can go live tomorrow. What takes time is the integration on their side. And that's why we invested so much in integration. But really, the procurement takes 90% of the time of getting through contract. And some of that is around contract negotiation. We're educating lawyers about data and machine learning and this idea of mashed potato. And then when the data becomes derived, de-identified data, it becomes like mashed potato with other derived, de-identified data from other organizations, and why it's important for us to retain that and how we use that. And it's like a self-driving car. It learns from everyone's data signals. And if it doesn't go in there, then yours runs the risk of bias. So, we're training lawyers, we're training, not so much cyber, but people who are in data privacy as well. This is really new, and we are often the very first AI technology that they've procured through their new shiny AI governance process. So you have to really go for businesses that have a very big pain and that are willing and ready, and you'll help them from an able perspective through the journey. So I think that that's probably the most important. I think the other is that we have been really obsessed with expansions. Our NRR will probably be about 120% at the end of this quarter. And so we're very aggressive with releasing new products. we started with one signature product and then we added on additional ones that drive value. So half of our revenue comes from expansions through new products, so revenue depth through product depth, and the other half come from new. And that helps to de-risk it, right? Because our customers love us. They see value very quickly. Like within one day, you start to see value. It's not like it takes a while. And so that really helps to underwrite the challenge of new. To have it, we had to earn our way through that, obviously, to get to that customer base. But that's how we balance it now, is expansion and net new.
Awesome. You mentioned to me before we started recording that distribution is super important to growing the business. Can you dive into what you meant there and why you think that's a very important part?
Yeah. So look, I think the procurement side, you cannot underestimate how challenging it is for companies to procure a genuine AI product. I actually found it a lot harder in the US than I find it here. At least in the EU, you've got one EU centralized regulatory authority, and that makes it cleaner. The US is a patchwork of regulation, and that makes it really tricky when you're selling into companies that are national. So for us, if we can minimize procurement tax for companies by offering our technology as a reseller arrangement, so we white label our capability within existing ATSs, within other technology stacks, so that we're really recessive. It's powered by Sapia. And what we do then is massively accelerate our reach. We know people don't have what we have, and there's a frigging gaping hole in most ATSs around the ability to do what we do. This, human-led hiring automation with deep talent intelligence. And so if we can get in there and we're offering something where there's a need, and it's one procurement process to acquire that ATS and Sapia within that, that makes everyone's life easier. So, often they say when you go to market, think about who else faces into the same challenge. These ATSs and these other technology stacks are desperate to have something to differentiate themselves and to show that they've got a full stack, including, deep AI capability that they can trust. So right now, I wouldn't say we're not going direct, but we're balancing direct with a distribution-led growth strategy.
Okay. So I understand, Barb. You mentioned earlier that there's a lot of differences doing business in the UK and Australia versus the United States.
Mm.
And you just mentioned that has to do with some of the laws. The EU is under sort of a single sort of rules for, I'm not sure exactly, but
Mm.
for AI adoption. And the US is spread out with different laws between the
Mm.
states. Can you dive into exactly what you mean there and what the differences
Yeah.
are?
Yeah. So you have at the federal level the EEOC, which sets laws around discrimination, and there are, it's a well-known baseline test that you use when you're measuring bias in the context of an assessment, right? Because we are, at its most simplest level, an assessment. And then because we're AI, probably, I don't know how long ago now, 4 or so years ago, New York City was the first one to introduce laws that said, if you're going to use AI in the process of hiring in any way, you need to do a bunch of things. You need to go through an independent bias audit once a year. You need to create transparency for the candidate and let them know and give notifications. And it was heavily negotiated. And so that's New York City. Then you have Colorado with a law that's kind of similar. Then California's thinking of their own law. It's all the Democrat states that are bringing in regulation. And so if you're a company that has hiring all over the place, it's really tough because you're having to comply with these state-based laws. And unless you've got a really big problem, right, you're kind of, can I be bothered? And so that's a real challenge. Whereas the EU has the EUA Act, which comes into place next year, and you do a one-time process to get into the database and you're done. It is unbelievably efficient for buyers, whereas it is unbelievably inefficient for buyers in the US. And then, of course, you have, certainly pre-Trump, you have the fear around litigation. The US is a very litigious society. And even though, interestingly, I think with the kind of cancelling of DNI, tools like Sapia mean that you don't have to worry about DNI strategies because we, in effect, interrupt bias just by virtue of the technology being there. You really equalize opportunity because everyone is being assessed based on their intrinsic DNA, not based on anything else, color of their skin, what sits on their CV. You don't need to have any preferred targets. So, it kind of meets that desire that many companies still have to reach the full talent pool in a way which doesn't create risk from a D&I perspective, But it does feel like the lawyers still make the calls and have veto rights in the US. And so, and I'm impatient. I just want to grow. And so I'm going to go to the market that's easier to grow in. And that's this market. There's also a level of maturity, I think, in the HR team and in the procurement teams because of GDPR. There are no privacy rules in the US, whereas the EU's had GDPR for a while. And so that regulation has created a real muscle around knowing how to navigate regulation and manage that and understand it, that it's a risk to be managed. We need to do a bunch of things. Let's do them and then we're done. Whereas in the US, the ambiguity just, creates deal death. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that too, especially once you start to multiply it with all the states that there are and that set of rules, the complexity grows substantially.
Yeah.
You mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, Barb, that you also are conducting interviews, or your technology now can be translated to other languages, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So
You
are
can
you,
you can interview in Klingon if you want.
what's Klingon?
It's the language from Star Wars.
Oh, look at that. Awesome.
Mm.
Um, so are you guys expanding then into other markets that are not English speaking
Yeah, yeah,
markets?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, we're in the EU now, so we have a number of customers who are using
Okay.
us in foreign languages, and so that came about through blending our IP with Claude. We've been experimenting with LLMs, and we've picked Claude as the one that we feel is best aligned to our own AI ethical principles, and so that has given us the capability to do this in 170 or so languages. That's not us inventing it; that's leveraging the power of Claude to do that translation with accuracy.
No, it's really cool. And something for me, I spend a lot of time in Latin America. So I'm originally from Canada, but I love to travel. I started learning Spanish maybe 5 years ago. And as you travel through different places, you have regional slang and regional words that
Mm,
changes.
yeah,
And I have found that the traditional translate apps are just not sufficient for catching up on this nuance that
mm,
I don't pick
mm,
up. So I almost exclusively use ChatGPT to help me with
yeah,
translations. Or if I
yeah,
want to
yeah,
say like a joke that's from a quote in English and you just can't translate it, it doesn't work literally.
mm.
So the LLMs are amazing for that.
They are amazing. Yeah, I mean, they've got all the data in the world, so that's why they're amazing.
So as you've been going, I went on your website, Barb, and I saw you mentioned you briefly talked about this earlier, but I'd love to dive into it
Mm,
more. You have an R&D team that publishes white papers, and I know
mm,
education has been a big part of Sapia
mm,
for just telling clients what the possibilities
mm,
are and educating
mm,
them on how
mm,
AI can be used in hiring. Can you
mm,
dive into a bit more of why you guys decided to do that? And then what
mm.
sort of feedback have you received from the people consuming your content on AI education and hiring?
Yeah. Look, I say that the two key white papers, one is the Fair AI and Recruitment, one that we released first, which was our own framework for how we think about measuring whether AI is safe to use, and we adopted this idea of fair because there wasn't a governing framework, and there still isn't globally. And that's around four key principles, which people can read about in the FAIR paper. And then we released another one around how we use generative AI in a way that is safe and ethical. And we apply a vendor agnostic framework, and then we show our own data measured against that. And that has been amazing to build awareness and trust. And, probably the most downloaded ebooks that we've got on our site, you know, 100x. And because everyone's learning, and learning is agency. And often that's the first step for people is to lean in. And that's what I say, lean in and give it a go. It's not, I think people are very scared by particularly HR. They're worried about losing jobs. But ultimately, if you adopt first principles, when you're looking at AI and you say, what's going on here? Like what's happening? What data are you using? Oh, okay. Use language data. That's interesting. And what are you doing with that language data? And how do you figure out what you're evaluating, like your questions? You don't need to be a rocket scientist to ask the fundamental questions and establish the fundamental truths around the product. How do you know if it's biased? Well, you test it because it's a data model. What do you test it with? Well, this is how we test it. And so, we've had those conversations a million times, and we'll have them another million times, right? Because that's what it means when you're bringing in something that is unknown. But all disruption comes with fear, and AI is no different. And so we've been building that muscle now since 2018. It's a lot easier since GPT, and it's a lot easier each year that goes past, because suddenly the whole world is starting to realize that it's not going away. And it's the, the adage of the hiring manager or recruiter or leader that uses AI will replace the one that doesn't, because it ultimately, as we all know, we all use GPT, it gives you ridiculous leverage. So why wouldn't you use something that just helps you do the things that you like to do? I mean, ultimately, that's what it's about, at its core, right? If it's not giving people back ridiculous amounts of time. And it's interesting, we had an event here last week with a really big retailer speaking about their experience with Sapia. And, we sat back afterwards as a team. We said, what do you think she was projecting? What was her, fundamental kind of takeaway from using Sapia? And it was really relief. It's relief, because people are really tired of the way it works. It's very broken and it's very exhausting. So, yeah, I don't know if I feel like I've lost track of the question.
No, that was great. I love it. I keep telling people nowadays it's the best time to be alive with all of these cool technical stuff that's coming up
Mm,
and how. So I work as a software engineer, and my workflow is just completely different from how it was a few years ago. Even
yeah,
as I talked about the language stuff, I can make jokes in Spanish now because GPT helps me catch that nuance, and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
And I was telling somebody the other day about Starlink and just like the fact you can have high speed internet anywhere you want.
Mm,
It's so
mm,
exciting. So it must be great for
yeah,
you. And I love
it is.
hearing your story. Just being on the edge of this technology and being at the point in time where you can really educate people on the power of it.
Mm, yeah, yeah. You can't. I think if you're going to bring on really clever companies, you have to honor their investment. I always go with an approach of enterprise empathy. You've got to respect that they are a Titanic, and it's going to take a while for them to move. And when you get them, they're very sticky, and you build these incredible relationships of value, and they're amazing reference clients for you. And so, once you're there, it feels pretty good.
That's awesome. Barb, as we start to wind down here, I have a few final questions for you.
Go for it.
So, over the next 5 years, where do you see Sapia being, and where do you see the state of AI and HR in general?
Wow, 5 years. I don't think it's going to take 5 years. So I think HR is going to be completely inverted. Instead of having HR and HR tech, you're going to have people tech. And I'm going to drive my own career and my own learning in my own time through this mobile. And I'm going to have agency. And whether it's getting feedback from my peers or boss or giving feedback, it's all going to happen through the medium of really the phone, the mobile phone. And we'll need a lot less HR tech. And my data will be my data, not your data. So I think there's a complete rewrite of the tech stack. I think there's a lot less tech. I think it's all going to be done through APIs, but really experiences first to give people agency is where I see the future of HR.
Awesome. And Barb, you mentioned to me earlier you had multiple careers before becoming the CEO of Sapia. Now you've been the CEO for 5 or 6 years now,
7 years, yeah. Whew.
7 years.
Yeah.
What's the number one piece of advice you give to your younger self?
Um, I know I should have thought about that. Look, I think for me as a woman, actually learning to trust my leadership and myself has been a learning journey. In the beginning, I would sort of defer to the board, and I would assume that these men who are investors know more and somehow have wisdom, beyond me. But actually, I'm closest to the product, the pain, the people, and so just believing in myself and leading. Even when it comes to firing people, it's really hard. It's really hard to do it when you're a small team, because we have a level of intimacy with our team. Everyone is very close, and then if someone is fired, you're not going to say, I'm firing this person because they didn't work out. You have to find a more dignified way to do it. And it's hard. Those moments are really hard. And so being comfortable as a leader and defining my own leadership style and growing into that has probably been the thing that I found the hardest. And if I leave this job, my role in life will be to just mentor young women in how to find their voice and, stop listening to the bird on the shoulder and just back themselves and go for it. I think we all overthink too much as a gender.
Awesome. I know the women who listen to the show will love hearing your story. Barb, it's been a pleasure. I loved hearing your story, how you guys are on the edge of technology. You're bringing a lot of benefits to enterprise level clients, but I really love how you also think about the candidate, provide feedback to them, and allow people on both ends to continue to grow. It's been a very eye opening story and providing education to people as well. And I love hearing from companies that are on the edge of technology because that's where a lot of the growth is. That's where a lot of the excitement is, and that's obviously where the world's moving. So, Barb, thank you so much for coming on the show.
That's a pleasure. Great to meet.